Good evening or morning or whatever time of the day it happens to be. Welcome all to the Writer's Black podcast. I'm your host, Greg Nykus. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are, wherever you're listening. Just thank you so much for joining us, for tuning in. We've got a really fun episode in store with my friend, author, journalist, and just overall good guy, David Phillips, joining us to talk all about how reporting on his passions has opened so many doors, some leading to love, some leading to the Oscars of all places, how a series of feel-good essays on Facebook turned into his book, Goodnight to the People's 10 Years with Two Dogs, and how the profession of journalism is starting to shift and pivot towards clicks and likes and that dopamine release that we get from refreshing the For You page every 10 seconds. If you're enjoying the Writer's Black podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review or dropping a comment to let us know how we can improve, what you'd like to see change with the show, whether it's format, whether it's guest suggestions, sky's the limit. Just let us know in the comments down there below. And if you really want to go the extra mile, consider heading over to our Patreon. That is patreon.com/writersblackpod. And following along there for absolutely free. You'll get some exclusive bonus content and get episodes of the podcast one day early. And on that note, let's get into this week's episode of the Writer's Black podcast with our guest, David Phillips. You are an online journalist. You write about multiple things. I know boxing and do film reviews and all kinds of jazz. What drove you to start writing about the things that you're passionate about?
It was funny. I years ago I ran a political website which was called The Big Slice, and it had some other lifestyle type of stuff into it, and personal interest pieces. Having my head in politics every day became very unhealthy, and so eventually I sold that off. The next thing I did was in the wilderness a little bit. I was doing a little blogging here and there. I started following a guy on Twitter named Michael Woods, who ran a website called The Sweet Science, which is a boxing website. I would just comment on his articles, and I would comment on his live feed when there was a boxing match going on. And I guess he thought I was intelligent enough in my responses. So he said, "Do you want to file a story?" I ended up filing one story, and then he put me on contract, and that lasted a little over a year. Then I moved over with him when he left The Sweet Science, moved over to New York Fights, and I did that for over a year, a little over, actually longer than that. Gosh. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, that's great. I love how it sounds a little bit like you had the stereotype experience of, "Hey kid, get in the car, we're gonna make you a star," but from a journalistic perspective.
Yeah, a little bit of that, and he paid me.
Yeah,
no, really exciting.
That's the amazing part, when your hobby can become a paycheck. So where did your film critic background come into that?
Growing up, living in a small town, we were, I would say, lower middle class. Films were the way I got to go on vacation. We didn't go to nice places. We didn't go on nice vacations. So I would go to a movie. I could go to Ireland. I could go, to other cities in America. I could go anywhere, right? And whenever the movie would take me. I kind of fell in love with film at a young age, and then I became a very, very big fan of Siskel and Ebert. And I always wanted to be Roger Ebert when I grew up. Of course, that occupation doesn't really exist anymore for the most part. But as I always wanted to write about film. And then when the internet blew up and blogospheres were created and free blogospheres, I started writing on my own. Eventually, a guy at Awards Daily named Ryan Adams took note of my writing and some conversations that we had. And he basically the same thing Michael did. He said, "Do you want to file a story?" It's kind of funny because I've been going through my archives and my early work about 7-8 years ago, and I'm like, oh God, you weren't very good back then. So I've been rewriting some of my old stuff. I kept at it, and I think I got better. And then eventually I got to do some cool stuff. I got to start interviewing some fancy people: Willem Dafoe, Ethan Hawke, Maggie Gyllenhaal, and some pinch yourself stuff while you're doing it. Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails was terrifying, but he was a great interview, but he was terrifying because he's exactly who you think he is. He's like, he doesn't really. I remember he laughed like at the 27th minute of the conversation. I was like, oh Jesus, I was just wondering if he was thinking I was an idiot all the whole time. Then I've judged at certain film festivals. I'm a regular at the Virginia Film Festival, and a couple of years ago I got to cover the Oscars on a press pass, which is a wild scene. Eventually I left Awards Daily and kind of did a shoot off with one of the editors there, and I'm working for The Contending now, which is my current site, and I should be October 22nd. I'll be back in Virginia for their film festival.
So boxing and film, not counting the dogs, which we'll get to later, is there anything
Sure.
else that you actively write about, have written about, or something maybe a different lane you'd like to take at some point going forward?
I get tempted to jump back in the political lane every now and then, but I remind myself that I was spending way too much time in the basement and gaining too much weight and, watching too much cable news and getting into too much misery over what was going on. And that's when the person I liked was president. So, now it's even more difficult. And, it's hard to even know what to write about in this day and time because there's so many malfeasances per day. By the time you've written about one, there's like three other, that have already piled up on you. So, I mean, I'm tempted sometimes to do that, but, film, TV, and boxing keeps me pretty busy right now. I will say this though, I did a short story, which is the first time I ever ventured into my own narrative for a Detroit Stories Quarterly, a small publication out of Detroit, run by a friend of mine named Keith Owens. So I did a baseball themed horror kind of thing with zombies and stuff. I don't think it sucked. The other thing that I've been working on, I've been working on a screenplay with a friend of mine who's fairly connected and knows some fancy people out in Los Angeles. It's really kind of her, I shouldn't say too much about it because it's her life story that she's kind of putting out there, but I've been helping her shape it. And I mean, I've been doing a lot of writing too, but I would say I would be the and credit. It would be her thing.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating just to make shit up myself, kind of experience, as opposed to reacting to something somebody else did.
So, in your opinion, David, I don't know if there's so much discourse now. I grew up at a time when, like, if you say you're going to make money on the internet, you get looked at funny. People, don't take that super seriously. So, in your opinion, is there a difference or a distinction between an online, like, blogger type person and a journalist, or are they the same thing? Where do you come down on that, or is there even a difference anymore?
It can be the same thing. I think it's often not. What I would say is you had to meet a certain standard before the blogosphere. And now there's no standard for anybody who wants to create a blog. And if they say the most fantastical thing possible, or if they're a hammer and nail kind of writer who, whatever side of the political spectrum they're on or whatever, they, they can get attention, not for how well they're saying something, but just for the fact that they're saying something that's attention getting. Oh gosh, I'm like an old man. There used to be expectations and standards in writing, and the hoops to get through to become a journalist were fairly stringent. Your expectations from you. The great thing about the internet and online blogging and all that is people can go out and find their voice. The bad thing, some of those voices aren't necessary. They don't add anything helpful to the discourse, but everybody can do it. And then you go through and you see some incredibly poorly written stuff, how they always say an opinion can't be wrong. It's the most garbage thing I've ever heard said, because an ill-informed opinion can absolutely be wrong. And so you get all of these all this writing out there, and you just think, aside from them not using Grammarly or finding some way to make sure that they're they don't have run-on sentences and all that. And it's still, I make mistakes too, so I don't want to be too high and mighty. But their content, it's so much of it is like short. And it's matching our attention spans, because our attention spans are shortening too. I tell myself every now and then, oh, you should try to make your pieces 800 words or less, because what they tell you is the right amount for a blog piece. And I'm like, but what if I got 400 more words of useful things to say? And so I end up just writing whatever I write. Sometimes I'm under 800, sometimes I'm 12 or 15 or even 1800. And a couple of times I've gone over 6,000 words. And I thought, maybe there's somebody out there for this. I think the difference is, and I don't want to say, hold on, I'm not holding some big torch for print media, because, you look at a lot of our newspapers as they're being bought by huge corporations, and Bezos owns the Washington Post and all of that. Their content is not as good as it used to be either, and you find even more misspellings on CNN.com than you would expect and all of that. But the most important thing right now is to get hits, and I get it. I mean, that's the hits is like the sales, right? It creates sales. But I think we're a long way from people having really erudite opinions and being able to share them effectively.
It's very easy to get lost in the noise, especially when it's like, oh, hey, this thing is over on Facebook. This thing's over on our Twitter. This thing is over on our Threads account. We have an Instagram for that. There's TikTok now. Somehow I still have a Vine account that we're uploading to every 5 minutes. That kind of a... Do you think that there is a way forward when it comes to centralizing things a little bit more? I know some places, like I know our rule of thumb at my old station was post the link to the story on the Facebook page and direct the traffic there, but We also got less clicks doing that than if we had just posted the thing directly onto the Facebook page. Do
Hmm.
you think that there's a way to kind of reunify everything like that again, or are we just kind of wherever, whatever platform we're on, we're kind of stuck with for right now?
Well, I sort of feel like remember Skype?
I love Skype. Great
I love
sounds.
Skype too.
Great sound
Yeah,
effects.
I think there's always this urge to create a new platform. Facebook is kind of considered to be for largely for old people now, and I still think as a method for posting, you can say more. You're not limited as much. You can do more with it, but if people are looking for their dopamine hit, Twitter or Instagram or things with photos or quick YouTube videos, whatever they are, TikTok especially, I think
Mhm.
that serves our modern society better. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking about millennials and younger only. There are people in my age group who don't have attention spans anymore, and part of it is because of this thing right here. I am addicted to my cell phone.
Did you also meet your wife through Facebook? Just being
Yeah,
a
so
witty little
yeah,
guy, a cheeky
I
little
probably
dude.
should have. Yeah, I probably should have led with that. As in the benefits of social
I was like,
media.
it's
Yeah.
coming, it's coming. I said, oh,
Yeah.
okay, we're moving on to the bad stuff.
Well, it was really funny. I had most of my Facebook posts, not all of them, most of my Facebook posts are open, and I don't know how she found me, but after the Trump won the first time, my brain needed to find a way to have an outlet to deal with this. And so what I did was I started thinking about what is the future Trump miniseries going to look like. And so I started casting people. And every day I would just say, and I shit you not, I really did this. I picked Holly Hunter for Sally Yates, and she ended up playing. Holly Hunter actually ended up playing Sally Yates later on. Jeff Daniels for James Comey, he ended up playing, and then Brendan Gleeson for Trump, and he ended up. I mean, I kid you not. I got the files in my phone. I don't know if they're dated or not, but anyway, I started doing that as like a coping mechanism. And my wife, my future wife Maria, found them, thought they were funny, and I didn't. When I saw her on there, I was like, "Who's that?" But I was like, "All right, she's friendly, whatever." We started kind of bouncing back and getting this little witty repartee going back and forth, and it was always on the feed, and it wasn't anything special. Then she started talking about the kind of music she liked. I'm like, "That's all the music I like." One day, I decided to actually click. So, I'm doing Facebook on my phone, so I clicked on her icon to go to her page. I was like, "Oh shit." She's pretty. Oh shit. How far is Boston from South Bend by car? 13 hours and change, right? And I was like, well, that's just not going to work. Then one day I decided to message her privately because our conversations were just kind of enjoyable. And I said, oh man, you don't want to be the creepy internet guy though, right? The private message all of a sudden. So I spent like an hour thinking about it. Because she's a singer, I suggested a song to her. That was my modest, mild as can be, vanilla intro.
Your
And
icebreaker.
yeah, my icebreaker. And I said, have you ever heard the song Love is Blindness by U2? I think your voice would be great for it. And then I get a response back like 2 hours later. I let it go. I thought, either she responds, she doesn't respond. Either way, it's okay. And she responds like 2 hours later and she goes, what are you, my producer now? I was like, okay. It's really true. I flew 888 miles to go on a first date, exactly 888 miles, and pretty number. And she wasn't catfishing. She was exactly the person I saw in the photograph, which is nice. And we just kept going, and we didn't know how we were going to figure it out. But eventually, we moved in together and sorted it out. And we got married, and here we are 7 years later.
Yeah.
So there's that.
At what point did you use the dogs as an icebreaker in that process?
It's a great segue because I was thinking about that. So I had two dogs and she had a cat and she loved dogs though. But there are people who I have met and dated who say they love dogs, but they don't really love dogs. It's like, oh, I like somebody's dog at a park, but I don't want to take it home with me, right? I don't want to have a dog in my house. And I've gone through that. When she met my dog, she was like, oh, these guys are great. And it wasn't fake. It wasn't phony in any way, shape, or form. And we both are of the opinion that if you give me the choice between a dog and a human, just blind choosing, we're going to pick a dog every time. And I think, my dogs were a little older in the way that she helped take care of them as they aged. I saw a meme recently that said, life is all about finding someone you want to raise dogs with. She's somebody I want to raise dogs with.
Speaking of the dogs, you had another little writing project that you did for years and are still actively doing, where you would do a creative writing post every night. Sometimes they're long, sometimes they're short, about your dogs, and you compiled the best of the best into a book.
I want to back up.
Okay.
Maria compiled them. I can only take credit for, she was the curator.
It's a team project.
It is a team project, but I mostly can take credit for years of doing it. And the funny thing about it is it started out as just something to do to end my day in a nice manner, to share something about my dogs and the day that we had. And it just was a way to finish out a lousy day or even a good day on an up, right? I would do it like 2 to 3 times a week, and then I got to be 3 to 4 times a week. I got to be 5 to 6 times a week, and then if I skipped a day, I had people, or even 2 days, I had people messaging me going, "Are the dogs okay? Are the dogs okay?" And I was like, "Oh damn! I guess this is like a thing now, right?" I started to do it almost every night. I rarely missed. It actually became a really good, as you pointed out, a creative writing project, because every night you have to come up with something, hopefully a little different than something that you've done before. It just kind of kept me writing every single day. And that had its own value. Multiple people had said to me, "You should collect these into a book." And I was like, silly, you're silly, And then she came along and she goes, "You should collect these into a book. And I know how to publish on Amazon and use Amazon Publisher." We collected a bunch of posts that we liked and, edited it down to what would fit in a roughly 170, 80-pound book. And it was just, a nightly message to the world about my dogs. And she designed the cover. She did all the font. She did all the editing. She made me sound smarter and caught my misspelling and all of that stuff. And then she, published it and created a book. And all of a sudden, you're asking me if I want to be on the WSBT. I was like, well, oh God, I'm going to be on camera. I'm scared.
You did great.
The thing that I before every interview, almost every interview, less and less so, I don't get as nervous as I used to. But there are some people, when I was getting ready to talk to Willem Dafoe, he's just a personal hero of mine as an actor. Or when I talked to Questlove a couple weeks ago, I was like, oh, Jesus, this is somebody I really love. I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to ask a bad question. What I find is, Bill Russell, the famous center for the Boston Celtics back in the 60s and so forth, he used to throw up before every game, every single game. When the ball went up in the air, he was good. And that's kind of how I feel about it. I get real nervous. Sometimes I can take a little shot of something if I'm really nervous, just to kind of ease myself into it. And I'm not saying you should drink before you do interviews. I'm just saying it works for me to take a tiny shot, and on occasion. And then once it starts, you're just talking. And that's the approach that I've always taken to interviewing: is make sure it's more they're talking more than you're talking, but also try to make it feel somewhat like a conversation, so that you can kind of, and I've had great results with that in some cases where I thought I was, like when I spoke to Harvey Keitel, I was told I was going to get 20 minutes. We talked for an hour. Like talking to Harvey Keitel for an hour, it's guy who's been in Scorsese flicks and so forth. So that's my approach to it. But yeah, I would worry if I ever walked into an interview with someone and I was completely confident whether I was nervous today. Now I'm fine, because whether it's I'm the subject or somebody else is the subject, you want to service the platform and the medium and the people that you're interacting with. So if I were to lose that nervousness, I'd be afraid that I would get sloppy, to be perfectly honest.
Do you have a favorite interview? I know you've mentioned the Muhammad Ali interview. I know you've mentioned Willem Dafoe. Is there one that kind of cuts above the rest in terms of just your fanboyism, or just because it felt like I've made it? I'm the adult in the room now. I've done the thing. I have the credibility.
I can tell you the one that was, it's hard to pick. It's like Billy Joel used to say, your songs are your children. Some of your children grow up to be lawyers and doctors, and some grow up to be bums, right? I've had some bum interviews, never the fault of the subject, always my fault, by the way. But I remember the interview where I felt like, oh, I've turned a corner. I'm actually getting good at this. And that was Ethan Hawke. I was interviewing him for The Good Lord Bird, the show he did where he played the abolitionist John Brown, the real life abolitionist, who was an insane person. It was a completely different part for him. And I just fell in love with the show. And when I got to talk to him, I was like, oh, Lord, I'm talking to Ethan Hawke. A friend of Maria's, Gwen Poole, she sometimes does my, when I have a lot of interviews, she'll go through and sort through them and edit them for me, in the written portion that I've transcribed. She will listen as she's cleaning them up. And she told me it was like listening to two friends talking over next to each other on bar stools. And I was like, well, that is actually what I was hoping for. I will also tell you the two scariest ones. I've already mentioned Trent Reznor, and I want to back up on that a little bit to say Trent was really, really forthcoming. It's just his persona is, this sort of dark and yeah, even humorless, which he isn't. He's actually quite funny. It's just that it comes through in dark ways. But he was a tough one because I knew that if I asked a dumb question, he wouldn't let me slide. And Kevin Costner was that way too. If I asked actually one point I asked a question that wasn't that great, and I was like, okay, I can't do that again because he essentially called me out in his tone of voice. Maggie Gyllenhaal was a tough start. And that was because we were meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, her time, and it was for The Deuce, the show that she did on HBO with David Simon, who made The Wire. She was just tired, and I always come to an interview with a little anecdote beforehand, which is basically intending to let the subject know that I know about their work, and it's not just about the thing that they're doing now; it's about something else they've done. Because then they start to feel comfortable. So I'm on Maggie Gyllenhaal. I'm like, hey Maggie, I'm like excited and all that. And she's like, I was like, oh, okay, it's like that, huh? So I quickly went into overdrive and said, I really enjoyed your work. And I mentioned a movie she was in called Sherry Baby, that with Danny Trejo, that very few people have probably seen. I do legitimately love it. I never lie. And I started talking about that a little bit. And then she like, oh, you saw that. I would say the same thing about Aubrey Plaza. When I interviewed her, I interviewed her for Emily the Criminal and the White Lotus kind of together. I always start my interviews at least 10 minutes early when they're on Zoom. Well, she showed up 12 minutes early. So I had my room up, but she was like, hello, hello. And she's a quick wit and,
Yeah.
a servant and all of that. So I like ran into the chair and I said, hey, Aubrey, I said, I just want you to know, I drove 2 hours to the sticks of Michigan to see Emily the Criminal in a theater. And she was like, you did? And all of a sudden we were rolling. It's that icebreaker. It's that because these folks do so many interviews, whether junkets or whatever, with people who haven't even seen their work, haven't even seen the movie they're asking them about. And, they would just want to know the person across from them is serious. Once you prove that, and you hopefully prove it very quickly, you can have a much better conversation.
I had a very similar interaction with Lou Ferrigno, who I don't know if you're aware is a very grumpy guy. I somehow conned my way into getting him on my show. It was very similar. Like he was early. He hadn't had breakfast yet. Big dude needs food to kind of keep going. I spent like $11 to get him a water, to get him like some kind of protein snack. He had like an almond out of it, and he had like 2 sips of the water and threw the rest away. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I asked for a picture, and I said I loved you in King of Queens. And he got a little chuckle out of that.
If you can make them laugh, you can get them on your side. And the other, I'm name dropping people who are front of the camera folks, but I interview a lot of behind the camera people too. And you don't have this most of the time. You don't have the same sort of excitement for that as you do for in front of the camera talent. But so many of those people are just really glad that somebody's interested in their work and that they're taking the time to really go into it. I give you one example, and he's a great musician, and he's pretty famous in his own right, but he is off-camera talent. Spike Lee's composer in chief, I would say, who's been has been on every movie he's made since Do the Right Thing in some capacity as a musician. He wasn't doing many interviews historically, and his PR was like, "Look, you've got a shot at getting an Oscar nomination for Black Klansman. You've got a shot. Go talk to people." So I talked to him in an early afternoon after he had played, because this guy has more time than anybody, or it fills his life with more music than anybody can think of. He was on tour with his band and he had done a show the night before. And so he was a little iffy on me on doing an interview. It wasn't that's something he enjoys. By being able to refer to his past projects and all of that, we ended up talking for over an hour, to the point where I was like, oh my God, how am I going to wrestle this interview to the ground, the post, right? I remember him saying at the interview, he goes, I want to thank you for this. They don't all go this way. That's another point when I started thinking, okay, I'm starting to figure out what it is that I'm doing, because I was all thumbs in the early going, all thumbs.
Do you have any issues with anxiety? Like, kind of, I mentioned like taking your shot before an interview, but it's like with anxiety, or just kind of, we talk a lot about mental health on the show in general. So I'm always interested to hear kind of how certain people.
I make coffee nervous. Okay. No, I wake up nervous. I wake up with a little anxiety. I'm sure there's some I actually know through therapy, and I don't mind saying that I had some, that, a lot of it, and this is the case for many, many people, it comes through your childhood, and things that happened or things that didn't happen in some cases, or things that you didn't know were bad until you saw that not everybody lives that way, right? Meeting people for me is not easy. People are like, oh, you're so great with people. I'm like, you don't know how hard it is for me, though. You have no idea. And I feel like I can, when the red light goes on, I can do what I need to do. But everything up until that is me like going over, and I'm not talking just about interviews. I'm talking about just meeting someone new. Like when I met Maria's mom and dad, I was terrified. I'm nervous to meet people. I'm the guy at a party who's like, is there a dog around? Because that's my safe place.
So, David, I think the last question, I guess, as we wrap up, it's a very important question. It's been on my mind for a very long time. When you go to make the big screen adaptation of 10 Years with Two Dogs, Goodnight to the Peoples, can I be your director? Can I be your guy behind the lens?
Absolutely. And if we can get Tom Hardy to play me, because look, it's not just because I love him. Oh, I do. If you're listening, Tom, I love you. It's not just because of that, but because that dude loves dogs like I love dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And also, he's way more handsome than me and way more interesting than me. But he can do a Midwestern accent. I've heard him do it. He can do any accent you want. He'd be great.
Who'd play Maria? I wonder.
I'd like to see Aubrey Plaza sweeten up and play Maria.
That's really good. That's a good one. That's a good casting. I'm on Rachel Brosnahan brains. That's where my brain was going, but I like Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, Maria's a sharp wit, and she's, as her father put it, she's both tough and tender. And Aubrey Plaza, I think, has that capacity. Anybody who has seen My Old Ass would see that she has a tender side too, not just the acerbic wit thing going on. So yeah.
Who would voice Dixon?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, I don't get into talking dog movies, so we'd have to have the it'd just be a woofer. Dixon's bark was high pitched, so we got to find somebody with a little bit of a soprano range for it.
Okay, I like that. We'll have some auditions.
Good luck finding a Lily. Jesus, Lily was just the strangest damn dog ever. We'd have to find a very curious beast for that one,
or a very believable animatronic. Well, David, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been great to talk and to catch up. Where can people go to find more from David?
Yeah, so you can find my boxing writing at Fights Around the World. It's fatw.com. And you can find my writing for The Contending at thecontending.com. And you can find my old school stuff at both awardsdaily.com and also at realreframe.com, which is my personal website. I use it to house things I've written just in case, because I've been burned before where a website I've worked for has gone out of business and I've lost my stuff. So I keep it there and it's visible. Anything that's like 5 years old, or I'm still importing stuff, but anything that's like 3 to 5 years older, and some original work too. Sometimes there's a situation like recently I saw The Materialists just a couple weeks ago, which is much after it came out. It didn't make sense for The Contending to put it up there, but I thought I had something to say, so I posted it there too. So you can find original work there that isn't anywhere else on occasion too.
Awesome. And then Goodnight to the Peoples is still available on Amazon?
Still available on Amazon, yeah. Goodnight to the Peoples is out there, and makes a great Christmas gift, stocking stuffer.
I have 2 copies and can recommend it highly. So
if you just want, if you want to just if you know a dog person and you want to warm their heart, I think it works.
Thank you, David, so much for joining us this week on the Writer's Block podcast. Guys, if you want to keep up with David, he is currently writing for Fights Around the World and The Contending. You can also find his previous work at Awards Daily, and you can find his book, Goodnight to the Peoples, 10 Years with Two Dogs, over on Amazon. We'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel, with another fantastic interview. In the meantime, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review down in the comments below, just let us know how we are doing, how we can improve, what you'd like to see from the show going forward. Sky's the limit, guys. You just have to ask. And of course, if you want to go the extra mile, you can follow us over on our social media. We have TikTok, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. We are at Writer's Block Pod on all of those. And the extra mile, of course, you can follow us over on our Patreon. That is patreon.com/WritersBlockPod. Once again, guys, thank you so much for joining us this week on the podcast. Until next time, I've been Greg Nikas. You've been awesome. And keep writing.